In this lesson, we'll use splines to build a bit of the apparatus on top of our capsule. So this is going to be a little bit of a different workflow. We're going to start by building a flat network of splines to build this sort of complex extruded shape. So let's go ahead, and I want to jump into the top view, and let me go ahead and we'll go ahead and leave everything on for now. I'm going to turn off the hyperNURBs. And so what we want to do now is use splines, and splines are basically just curves. So we can find our splines here in this command group, and you can see that we have a number of primitive splines that we're able to draw out, and then we can also draw out our own custom splines, these orange ones. And the interpolation types you can see here, there's Bezier, which has the tangent handles, cubic, and B-spline, which is kind of more of like a NURBS type of a curve. And then linear, would have sharp edges, and then a freehand where you could just draw it out. What we're going to do is start out by using primitives. So I'm going to go and bring in a rectangle. You can see that just with any of our other, as with any of our other primitives, we have the ability now to modify how this actually looks. So let's go ahead and move it back, and I want to just kind of roughly get a shape and kind of a just rectangular shape, something like this. Now with these, you also have the ability to round the corners if you want to. You can turn that on and then change the radius of the rounding in here. You can change the radius or the plane that this is drawn on. This is drawn in the ZX or XZ plane, which is what we want. But if you want it facing a different direction, you can change this plane here. You also have the ability to change your intermediate points, which we won't really go into. All right, so now we have our curve in place. Let me go ahead and turn off some of these other objects so that we can kind of see a little bit more clearly what's going on. Okay, so what we want to do now is start to cut out areas of this curve. So I know I want to make some rectangular cuts in the back, so I'm going to control drag another rectangle, and this time I'm going to kind of scale it in like this, and then I'm just going to move it back kind of right in here. Okay, let's make another copy of that. Let's move it in, and I'm going to make it even more narrow. And move it in kind of like that. Okay, and so I'm just thinking about where I want to actually cut this out. So I'm going to make this a little bit longer. Maybe something like that, and then take both of these and kind of move them out a little. Give us a little bit more room. I'm now going to bring in a circle, and I want to move it over, and I want to choose, you can see we have different options here, different attributes for the circle. I want to turn it into an ellipse so that I can change the values here independently, and so I'll squeeze down that Y, so maybe something like that. I also want to kind of cut off the edges, so I'm going to use another rectangle to do that. Again, just copying that. I'm just going to bring it up here, kind of like this. Make another copy. Bring it down like that. Okay, so something like that. Now, how do we start to cut some of these pieces out? Well, let's take a look. We know we want to cut out some of these areas, and so let's go ahead and take all the curves that we want to use to cut out our shape, and we can right click and we can connect objects and delete. Now before we do that, I actually want to make those editable, so that turns them into editable splines, and then we can connect them, and there's still one spline, but it has a number of these different little sections in them. Okay, and let's go ahead and do the same thing with this one. Make it editable, and then we'll connect and delete, making that one spline here, as you can see, and this is going to be used to cut. All right, so let's go ahead and convert this spline, and now to start to cut out the splines here, we want to use something called a spline mask. So let's go ahead, and under our generators, you can see the spline mask here, so we'll add that to our hierarchy, and then we just want to drag both of these splines underneath the spline mask. Okay, so let's see what's happening here. It doesn't look very good right now, so let's take a look at our spline mask attributes. there's really not too many attributes to select from. You can see we have a mode and an axis, and then the ability to create a cap. So let's look at the mode. It's basically a Boolean type of operation. So we've got A union B. So think of A and B as our two splines in here. So this is saying we want to join A and B, or we can take A and subtract B from it, or we can take B and subtract A from it, or we can create an intersection. So we have our rectangle here and our circle. So this is what we want to subtract from this, okay? So if we move this up, we want to basically subtract B from A. So on our spline mask, we'll say A subtract B, and we want to do it along the y-axis. So we're working on the xz, and we want to do this along the y. So we want to choose for our axis xz, and right now we have xy chosen. So we'll choose xz along y, and there you can see we've cut it out. Now you can see that we still have this, and that's because it's a separate spline, so we really need that to be separate. So what we can do is select this object. Let's go ahead and we want to, let me go to points, and we want to explode segments. That gives us all of our segments back. So what I want to do is take out that small one that I didn't include at the beginning. Okay, and then I want to take all of these, go ahead, connect and delete, drop that back into our spline mask. Okay, and let's go ahead, and you can see this is our new one. So if we turn that off, you can see it's now cut that out. So now we want to cut out this smaller section. We can take this spline mask, go ahead, make it editable. We can delete our initial splines, and now we have this spline. So it's been sort of baked down into our spline. Now we can use another spline mask. We'll take this object, or the spline, and our small little rectangle here, and do it again. So we want to go A, subtract B along Y, and now we can cut out that little part. And now we'll do the same thing. We'll go ahead and either say make editable or current state. Get rid of these splines. And now we want to add some thickness to this, and I want to actually have a hole. Now if you want a hole, all you have to do is incorporate another spline in here. So I want to add another circle. We don't need to use a spline mask, we just need to put it in position. So I'll put it in position. So something like that. Make that editable, select both of them, connect objects and delete. And now this is one spline, okay? Now still, we don't have any geometry on this spline, okay? So what we need to do is use a generator to create some geometry. So we'll go up to our generators and use an extrude NURBS. Let's grab our spline and stick it under our extrude NURBS. And let's see what's going on here. So under our extrude NURBS, we have three areas for movement. This is basically the direction that our geometry is going to be created, and the length. So right now we've got X, Y, and Z, or H, P, and B, depending on how you look at it. And so we want to go ahead and take out the value here, and we want to move it up in the Y, which corresponds to the pitch. So we'll go ahead and add some thickness in that direction. Okay, this is great for these sort of little machined parts here. I'm going to give it a little bit of thickness. If you want to add subdivisions in here, you can do that. We also have the ability to manipulate the caps. So the caps are on both ends. Okay, if you don't want any caps, you can turn those off and you get that. But we do want caps. If you just choose straight cap, you don't get any sort of filleting. But if you choose a fillet cap on both ends, you get a little bit of a bevel, and you have these options in here. So I'm going to reduce the radius here. Let's increase the steps so it's a little bit more of a strict bevel. Now, one tip is when you're dialing this down, if you just click, you're going to go by one increment. But if you hold down Alt, you can go down by tenths. So we can go down now very in a very exact way. So we can take that down if we wanted to make it more like 2.3 or something. We could do that. Okay? And so that's a great way to create some geometry very quickly just from splines. If you want to have a nice flat piece like this, the extrude NURBS along with your splines can help you do that. And your spline mask will allow you to get some really cool sort of looks here. Now one thing I want to do now, let's say, is go back and edit the spline. So I can just turn the effect of our generator off, let's say, and I can come back in here and select the spline. Let's say I want to select this point. I can right click and I want to say, okay, change that to soft interpolation. And now I get a very soft look. I can kind of pull that out. And the effect you can see in our geometry. Okay, so you can still go back and edit your spline, and that's one of the things that makes this type of a workflow really nice thing to do. Okay, we can also go into our Fong tag, and you can see by manipulating the angles here, turning off the angle limit and so forth, you can change how this piece looks. Okay, as far as the shading of it. All right. So now that we have this sort of piece built here, let's go ahead and build an antenna to kind of stick up from this. So we'll go ahead and do that next.